My name is Serhat. So I'm from Turkey. I'm coming from Istanbul. So thanks for Atlassian for bringing me over here. So I work for Opsgenie actually, but they acquired us last year. So I'm still working for the Opsgenie team within Atlassian. I'm also one of the global organizers, one of the part of the core team for DevOpsDays events, and I'm an AWS community hero. So if you want to chat like DevOps after this one, I'm going to be around here. So again, like Aaron said, Emily talked about the importance of human factors, right? And later we talked about things like auto-remediation, the importance of auto-remediation. I was like particularly interested in like use cases around AWS and how to use it to auto-remediate incidents. And finally, we talked about chaos engineering. I think this talk is kind of like building the step-by-step awareness around the importance of human factors in DevOps. And we are going to talk about specifically on-call today. So before, are you working in an organization that expects you to be on-call? I'm trying to understand how many of you are familiar with the on-call concept. Awesome. So do you think on-call sucks? My second question. Okay. So I think on-call sucks. It is in some ways, for sure, it can suck in some ways. But before moving on to those parts, I want to talk about why, because we often miss the why part, and it is really important to understand the reasoning behind why we are doing these things before actually talking about what. So first, let's take a look at why do we need to have on-call in the first place. So I could give you a lot of examples from big cloud companies like AWS or Azure or Google Cloud. We know when they fail, we fail too, right? But I want to give you a different example. An example from 911. The emergency service that our lives depends on. I mean, it is called something different in Turkey, but the example is from here, United States. It is 112 in Turkey, by the way, if you need it. So in 2014, on a June morning in Washington, 911's IT manager got a page. Someone was trying to reach out to 911, but he couldn't, so he was only able to reach 911 after borrowing someone else's phone. So they realized that this problem occurred only for a specific telecom provider. So they tried to reach out to telecom provider, but they couldn't. So the problem is resolved only after hours without a response from the telecom provider. They had no idea what was going on. And in another incident last year, in 2018, so emergency cell phone provider faced an even more serious incident. So the data center provider that many telecom providers use here in the United States had a big outage, and it brought down many cell phone carriers' 911 service for over a day. So it was a huge one. I mean, not all incidents are distressful, but they can be, and their effects can be huge. So that is why we need on-call people who can respond to these kind of critical incidents immediately, as soon as possible. I mean, on-call obviously is not fun if you can't go to the beach, obviously, and if you wake up at 2 a.m. in the morning, it's no fun. But there's also the other side of the story. So researchers from the University of Hamburg worked with 132 individuals, and they collected daily surveys over a period of 4 days, during which they were not required to be on call, and during 4 days, which they were required to be on call. And they also collected cortisol level samples from 51 of them, body's main stress hormone. And the results revealed that on-call is not leisure time, even if there is no alert. There are significant effects of on-call. There are significant effects of extended work availability on the daily start of the day mood and cortisol awakening response. So acknowledging these facts helps us invest more in on-call and take actions to ensure that we put enough effort to make on-call healthier. And as a software development industry, we are actually doing a lot of things better than we used to do, especially within the last 10 years with DevOps. One of the first things that many companies do when they think about DevOps is building a CI/CD pipeline. And even if starting DevOps helps them reduce outages and bugs. Atlassian had this research with over 500 people, IT professionals, and they found out that 57% of teams report fewer bugs and outages after they adopt CI/CD solutions. But there was an important breakpoint in this whole making on-call better for everyone. The idea of you build it, you run it changed our industry. So AWS started doing this over a decade ago. And just to give you a similar experience from Opsgenie, when we were small, just 3 years ago, we had, like 3.5 years ago, and when I started working as a software engineer, we had 15 engineers in our team, and only 2 technical co-founders were taking on core responsibilities. So it worked out pretty well for some time, but after we scaled our teams, we started reaching out to like 40 engineers right now, just 100 engineers working on just Opsgenie, and it doesn't work well. Like just with 2 technical founders taking on core responsibilities. I mean, they started getting a lot of alerts from like increasing number of services, and they don't really know every little detail after some point. So it starts. I mean, they come up in the morning and they say, please solve these problems. In every meeting, it doesn't work well. So we started putting our developers on call, especially for the night shifts, for the outside of business hours shifts. So this whole notion of developers on call changed our industry. And I think there are 3 main benefits of putting developers on call. And again, like if you want to build a health on call culture, put developers on call. That is I think the most important lesson that I've been seeing from talking with customers and from within our company as well. So first of all, this helps companies meet the increasing demands around availability, reliability, security of our services, right? I mean, it doesn't matter like which industry you are working for. Your services has to be online. We just assume they're online now. And developers of these services are often the most qualified people to solve these problems. And the second important thing is that being on call enables developers experience the problems and the pain from the first hand. So they start caring about things like testing, instrumentation, monitoring applications, alerting, things that they don't really care about if there are only like a couple of people taking all the alerts. If there's just one ops team taking all the on-call load. And the third one, often we miss this one, is the better alignment of development and development. What I mean development is development and operations as a whole, and management. So if there is just one team, just a couple of folks getting all the alerts, management just, they're there to management can just go and blame them. They can just, hold them responsible for the outages. But if you have now developers on call, they can clearly see the effect of all those alerts on the development teams, how it affects the future development as well. Now they have a clear idea, they have a more clear idea, and the reliability, the importance of the reliability work. So at this moment, I want to share a personal story with you. So this happened about 2 years ago when I was still working as a software engineer. So me and my friend worked on this feature, indexing our alerting data to Elasticsearch. So again, for those of you who don't know, Opsgenie is an alerting on-call management and incident management solution. So alerting page is kind of important. I mean, when people go logged in to Opsgenie, the first page they see is the alerting page. So we worked on this feature for 2 weeks. So it was about like 5 p.m. on Friday. We decided to send it. It was kind of a big change in how we index our data. So we couldn't wait until Monday. And again, like if you're ever going to remember something from this presentation, don't ship features after 5 p.m. on Friday. It is never a good idea. I'm not saying don't ship on Friday. I mean, someone tweeted last week, I was talking in DevOpsDays Boston, someone said, Serhat, is it don't deploy on Friday advocate, kind of. I mean, I'm not saying that, but be careful if you're sending, like, people left the office. I mean, be a little bit careful. It's just like the last talk, right? I mean, you don't have to send every feature, especially on Friday as you leave the work. So we decided to send it. And it broke our alerting page. So we could not catch the problem at this point. We were like monitoring, we signed the feature. So 10 minutes passed, we didn't see any problems. We were just about to leave. And then customer success team creates an alert. there was some inconsistencies on the UI, so they were able to replicate it, and we weren't, like some of the people were able to replicate it, some of the people weren't able to replicate it. So they created an alert for the alerting team. Alerting team receives an alert. I wasn't on call at the time for the alerting team. So on call knows that I'm sending these features because they can see the Jira dashboard, like which issues are going to production at that moment. So they add me as a responder onto alert, so I get paged as well. But we try to solve the problem. We realized that there is a problem. We couldn't figure out what is the problem, but it is a high impact at this point because people are seeing like people acknowledging alerts, but people seeing that they are not acknowledged, people closing them, but they are still there. Even though it doesn't affect the notification flow, it affects people's, it's basically a huge deal at this point. So we bring in the incident response team basically a lot of senior engineers. So we had this option to just say we had 2 clusters running at the same time with the same data at that point. So we had this option to disable the clusters. So we tried to take our chances. So the point is just stop the bleeding first. Again, like not to fix everything. At that point, we had this option to disable one of the clusters, so we did. So it actually solved the problem for a while, but obviously we weren't able to, we weren't going to depend on just one cluster and by the way, it triggered other alerts because there are now more loads going through one cluster. So we started receiving alerts from CloudWatch about the increasing CPU usage, et cetera, but we were able to still cover the load at that point. So after a lot of debugging, we found a bug. Basically, we weren't considering the nature of, async nature of Elasticsearch by writing to different clusters. This causes, basically not synchronized data on Elasticsearch clusters. So we sent the fix after an hour. It's 9 p.m. at this moment, but there were still inconsistencies because the new alerts were in the right state, but the older ones were messed up at this point. So it was about 2 a.m. We ran the data sync job because we have a global we have a global user base, so we couldn't wait until Monday to fix all this data. So we ran the data sync job and brought back the app into a healthy state. It was around 2 a.m. in the morning as we started leaving the office. So lessons learned. So I will give examples from both some of the successes we have. Most of them are from this example, but also there will be some examples from what I've seen from the industry, from talking with the customers as well. But I want to point out something very important. Andrew Kulesheffer always says this. So you haven't learned anything until you change your behavior. It's very important. So we are going to talk about these things, but please go in your company and try to make some changes. So the first one is avoiding hero approach. So heroism is not sustainable. Having just a couple of people taking all the alerts, especially as you scale your company, is not going to work. It doesn't scale well. So obviously, we talked about putting developers on call. That is the first thing that we need to do. And also, we need to think about building healthy rotations, like not putting people on call for more than a week, for example. But there is more to this. So first thing, make it easy to call for help. So for example, alerting team decided to page me. They didn't go Slack or just call me. They basically add me as a responder to the alert, so I get automatically paged from the notification preferences that I want. I get a call, I get an SMS message at the same time, so I'm aware of the problem. So we also have three-step escalation paths for different priorities. So this was a priority 1 alert, high priority. So if they weren't able to reach the alert weren't able to lead, if the alert wasn't able to act by the first responder, in case the alerting team responder, it was going to page, after 2 minutes, it was going to page the whole team because it's a priority 1 alert. We knew that it's a high impact customer success team were able to see that it's a big thing, right? So the third one is arranging development duties during on-call based on your pager load. So what I mean by this is we started, on-call, putting developers on call. First, we said that half of your time you will probably spend on the alerts. Half of your time you can probably spend on the developing new features. So we basically included them on the sprints and expected them to also do some feature work. We figured out it doesn't work for us for some time. So we basically only expected them to do on-call work for some time. So they were working on the alerts. Even if there is no alert, they were working on the existing alerts, trying to make better. So we did that for over a month. It worked quite well. We fixed a lot of problems related to our alerting, and then we got back to the original plan. So it is important to make these changes and talk with your team time to time. And what I can suggest is, especially as you know, most of the problems happen after you change something, right? If you are deploying something new, that's probably most of the time that those things cause incidents. So what we do now is we assign on-call temporarily to the on-call engineer who is making deployment for that team, 15 minutes, for example. If there's an alert, probably related to that service, probably the person who is sending the deploy, who is sending the update, knows it better. So the second one is about alerting. We talked about alerting before. I want to repeat what some of the folks here said as well. Alerts can become the best or worst friends of on-call engineers. So there's a great example. So in 2010, a Massachusetts hospital patient died after alarms, signaling a critical event went off and unnoticed by more than 10 nurses. So basically, they didn't care because they were getting a lot of alerts. They just assumed it's false. They didn't even see those alerts. And patient died because of this. Just ignored alerts, turned off unheard alarms. So it is very important to proactively fight against the alert fatigue. It is not just about missing important alerts. People are also it is also about people will not care about alerts after some time. So what we need to do is to first make the clear distinction between what is a ticket and what is an alert. It is very important. If you are getting a lot of alerts, just turn them all off and start creating new alerts. That is a great way to start alerting, start fighting against the alert fatigue. And you should add context on alerts. It can be runbooks. Runbooks can be hard to manage sometimes, so try using maybe runbook links or having using something like Confluence to keep the runbooks so that they can be version controlled. Also, they can be up to date. And also adding some details like log details, for example, attaching them onto the alert so that to reduce the switch between the alerting tool, monitoring tool, and during the incidents. So one thing we do is identifying and reviewing repeating alerts. So we have this job checking, basically making the API calls to Opsgenie and checking if there are repeating alerts and sending those alerts to a Slack channel so people can see them and people can take action. We expect them to take action and fix those repeating alerts. So the next one in my list is blameless culture. And I will not go into that just blameless postmortem, so blameless incident reviews. I want to talk about blameless culture. Because words also matter. During incidents, if one of our, for example, co-founders comes and tells me why didn't you see this thing? It doesn't matter if those things aren't written on the blameless postmortem, right? So it has to be a blameless culture, not just blameless postmortem. They are for sure important, but it has to be a blameless culture. So in those cases, again, it is easy to blame people. This is our natural tendency, right? So when that happens, I think about the why. I think about two things. This happened to me more than once. Someone from our team, for example, sending this thing and causing partial outage 2 times. So it's kind of, you want to say something, but then I think about these 2 things. First, blameless comments help no one. It practically helps no one. People will be afraid of sending new features at some point. Most of the time, in my personal experience, I see that these people who send the most significant features, they are also causing the most, not causing, they are also, they are also involved in these incidents. Because they're not afraid of to change things, right? If we blame them for for these incidents, they're going to afraid of like sending these features, sending these things, right? So we need to assume good intentions. That is very important. And also, we need to realize that people are not the root causes of incidents. And in my case, for example, we did not have the same staging with the production for our Elasticsearch instances. So we could not really test the async nature on staging. So, I mean, there's always something missing. So this is never people's problem. So the next one is about embracing open. Because open is not easy. As like Emil said in the opening keynote, it means being vulnerable, transparent, willing to fail things up in front of others. But sharing knowledge makes everyone smarter. So what we do is we regularly meet every 3 weeks and talk about on-call and alerts. So we try to encourage people to speak up and talk about the problems they're having related to on-call. So we also use a version-controlled docs for our on-call policies, what we expect from people, what we don't expect from people. So for example, we answer questions like, are engineers supposed to be on-call during nights? Or if on-call during nights, is there flexibility to work from home after a tough night maybe? Or are engineers supposed to do development work during on-call time? Or maximum how many times in a month would an engineer can be on-call? Things like that should be stated, should be on a version control document. And finally, just like Jason talked, the best way to predict future is to create it, right? So we need to practice incident response. We need to have hands-on experience if possible. So one of the best ways is shadowing. So I had this little poll, 80 people, but still something. And when I asked, do you use shadowing for on-call onboarding? Almost half of the people said yes. Almost half of the people said, what is that? So what I understand from this poll, if people know about shadowing, they use it. So shadowing is basically you put an on-call engineer, a new on-call engineer who doesn't have much experience with on-call, but on the rotation at the same time with an experienced on-call engineer, so they all get the alerts at the same time. Ideally do this first during the business hours so they can start working on the issue at the same time. They learn from each other, especially the inexperienced on-call engineer. So it's a great practice. We talked about game days just before this talk, so I will not talk about game days again. Things like wheels of misfortune, for example, you can use those practices to have some fun, eat some pizza, and practice chaos. And there are some great podcasts out there. I love listening podcasts, so I can suggest On-Call Nightmare podcast. It's a great one. And finally, we have team playbooks. So people Atlassian team playbooks, so you can assess whether you are doing some of the things related to on-call and incident right or not, and keep those health checkpoints and see how you are doing after some time, and meet with your people regularly. So finally, and this is also pretty important, compensate on-call. We talked about on-call not being a leisure time activity, so we have to compensate for it. I'm talking about outside of business hours on-call, of course. So for example, first we decided so we have different policies right now for different countries, but we are thinking about updating them at some point, so we are iterating. So right now we have, after 1 week of on-call, we give mandatory weekday off for our on-call engineers, for our Anchor office, for example. For our Sydney office, we pay for on-call extra time. It's really a critical balance, but don't ever pay for on-call just per alert. It's just people might create more alerts at some point. It is, so it's kind of dangerous, right? So key takeaways. First, if you want to build a health on-call culture, think about putting developers on call, especially once you scale it until a certain point. It is really the only way to keep the on-call healthy. with that, create sustainable rotations. Think about like what is the talk with your people first, and think about what is the like maximum, number of times they can be on call. What works best for them, and try to give flexibility for each team. Don't mandate like every team has to be on call like for a week. Teams might have different priorities, so basically let them choose what is best for them. Be open and share knowledge. It's very important. Write down your policies in a public document within your company, and embrace effective alerting practices. It's very important. Again, like put context on your alerts. And for example, even just go further. And we talked about auto remediation before. You can just click one button on the alert and actually try to remediate things. For example, if you are getting more loads, for example, you can add an instance to your load balancer with just one click. You don't have to switch between tools. Just try to make things like this easy. And practice incident response. Game games is a great way of doing this. Again, shadowing. And finally, compensate on call, because on call isn't leisure time. And I want to close my talk with a great quote from the Site Reliability Workbook. I really like this quote. Google says in the Site Reliability Workbook that we never achieve reliability at the expense of on-call engineers' health. It's very important. So put people first, and the rest will follow. Thank you very much for having me today.